Great. Actually, let's get started. Like I do in every session, I'll give a quick context. And first of all, welcome to everyone for joining. I'm forgetting which edition of SaaS Talks it is, but I think it's probably 37th to, uh, to my recollection. Um, as we have always talked about, this is not meant to be a rags to riches kind of story. We were very small, we have become very large. This is actually meant to be on a functional topic in building a SaaS company, things that you can directly learn from and hopefully apply on a Monday morning, by the way, which is why we do it on a Friday. And the way this session is run is that usually I'll kick it off with a few questions around the topic. And then most of the session will be driven by audience questions. And audience should feel free to actually even come on the screen if they would like to. They can raise their hands or put their questions on the Q&A panel. And again, that's a request only on the Q&A panel and not on the chat group. Or just raise your hands. We'll actually bring you on board here. And there are many entrepreneurs actually on this call, as I can already see, who have built reasonable businesses. Some of you might actually have opinions. This is meant to be a discussion. So if some of you have opinions also, please feel free to come here and we would love to hear from you. With that, actually, let me first introduce the topic of RevOps, and which is actually it's a repeat topic we were just sort of discussing that we did this 2 or 3 years back. And given that a lot more entrepreneurs have been created in the SaaS space in the meantime, we thought that it'll be worth doing this again. And the intent of doing this is that while many people have heard words like sales ops, marketing ops, the understanding of this function is actually very little. Often people struggle about what this role is about, when to do this, when not to do this, what to keep within the bucket of sales ops or RevOps, or what not to keep within that bucket. And I always think that this is like building a foundation. If you don't have the foundation, the building is very hard to build. It's just one of those kinds of functions. We have 2 outstanding folks today to guide us through this. I'll begin with Siva here first, who I met, I think, 4 years back for the first time. Siva, as most people would know, is the founder and CEO of Everstage. Brings a very interesting background because he's building a company which is targeting RevOps as a persona. More specifically, at least my recollection is more around sales incentive compensation, but I know you have broadened as well. But also because you were running this function back at Freshworks at a pretty sizable scale, and was a management consultant in the prior life. Those who have been to many SaaS talks know that it's a repeated sob story. Most people who come here are people who I regret not having invested in, and Everstage is also one of those. We also have Maneesh. Maneesh, actually, I've known for a very long time. We are soon going to complete about 20 years. But Maneesh and I worked together very closely at SAP for 5 years. Maneesh now is a Chief Revenue Officer of LambdaTest. And as I discovered earlier in this call, an early customer of Everstage as well. Maneesh ran GitHub in India prior to that, was at Adobe, was the Chief Revenue Officer of VizIQ, another startup in the software space, and many other companies in his distant past. And as his hair will suggest, I'm happy to say that there is somebody of my vintage on this call. But thank you so much both for joining the call today. I'm actually going to kick off, and most of the questions I'm going to throw. Either of you feel free to pick it up. But to begin with, and I think it'll be very useful for people just to understand that when you use the word RevOps, what does it mean? And because people use sales ops, marketing ops also fairly interchangeably, what are the distinctions between those? And maybe, Siva, you can actually pick it up first because you ran this function and have a company targeting this. Why don't you go ahead first?
Absolutely. Hey, everyone. Great to be here and talk about RevOps. It's just like more a very passion kind of thing for me. Even today, I feel I'm more a RevOps person than a founder and CEO in some sense. But I think for me, RevOps, it really is anything to do with supporting the company hit their revenue goals across the funnel, right? Starting from marketing to sales to customer success. And when I say support, support could be in multiple different forms. One could be in terms of planning for going after and hitting your goals. Second could be process associated with how you structure the entire revenue funnel. And third could be tools associated with supporting the go-to-market function in terms of hitting the goals. So RevOps is something that where you connect all of these different functions, right? From generating pipe to then closing and winning those customers to then ultimately retaining and making them successful and probably even expanding them, right? So a function that helps support all of these different parts of the GTM from a planning process and tools standpoint is what I would call as RevOps.
Got it. Maneesh, I'm actually going to flip to you, and you have been at very large companies with massive scale. You are now at a reasonable size startup yourself, have been in early stage in the past as well. As you think about these different sort of stages of a company, if you are a SaaS founder, at what stage of the company will you start thinking about having this function?
It's a tricky one, Alok. I think it's very easy to say from day zero, but on day zero, you will not really call it RevOps, right? I think you will start hiring for different roles. The most basic one is the CRM piece, right? Having somebody in sales operations who is starting to put together the fundamentals, as you said, right? Yeah. Putting the data together. So that forms the first part of the RevOps jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
And as things evolve, as you start to do more of, digital marketing, outbound marketing, you need somebody to, work on, customer data and the marketing data. So you will hire somebody for marketing, handling the marketing ops, as Shiva was saying. And as you know, everything is subscription now, right? In today's day, you need somebody in finance to track subscription, incentive management, right? What is going on, what is turning off, what is contracting, what is churning. So you need somebody in FinOps. So I think in early stage, founders need to think about these different roles as you start building things together. And as you scale, these teams obviously are working together and they do come together to form the RevOps function. So you shouldn't be deliberate in saying, okay, I need to put together a RevOps function. What you need to be deliberate about is in these different functions of yours, the planning piece, as Shiva was saying, have somebody in sales ops to look at, what numbers you need to plan, how you need to segment, how you need to look at different data points for enterprise, mid-market, and SMB, finance, and marketing, and then bring this together as you scale.
But Maneesh, I want to push a little bit further on this. If, let's say, you are in early stages of proving product market fit, I'm making the assumption that you don't need a sales ops function at that point in time. And again, that's me making that assumption. Would love for you to counter that as well. Is it at $1 million ARR, at a 5 million ARR, at a 10 million ARR? At what stage do you begin to actually build a function for the first time around this? And it's a question that comes up often and actually in many companies, and therefore either of you, by the way, please go ahead.
I think as soon as you're hitting 500K and above, you need to have somebody for data. You might not call that individual as a sales ops person or a marketing ops. You need somebody to be putting together your data, because as you're doing your PMF, Alok, you're also validating who you're targeting, right? Who is your persona? Which customers you need to go after, which geographies you're going after. So at 500K, you need to start putting this together, because as you bring in your first salesperson, you need to give that individual the data to go after. You should not leave, in my view, you should not leave, the strategy of execution to the salesperson. You should package everything together from a sales ops, rev ops, data ops, whatever you want to call it, and tell the salesperson, okay, this is what you need to go after, go and execute, right? And then keep on fine tuning it. So I think as soon as you're hitting 500K, you should have that data person in place.
Shiva, any
Actually,
different thoughts? Because you started at
actually very
for your company. I'm curious, in your company, when did you have the first person in sales ops?
so very aligned with Manish because we had the person who is currently a director of RevOps, Venkat. He joined us right after we hit about 500,000 in ARR. So very very similar to what Manish is suggesting here. And ultimately, the way I think about this is obviously, when the person comes in and he was at like a mid-level position when he came in. So he was not a junior person coming in, right? And that was important because you're going to try and put that person across multiple different areas. Obviously there could be the aspect of, starting to put a process together, given that you're starting to see some form of PMF. But it could even be getting the tools up for success, as Manish was mentioning, like the CRM, which is your core tool that you're going to track everything. It could be about doubling down on what's working on your marketing channels and where do we go invest further and what's really giving us that recurring piece. Or it could be just even structuring territories, which regions to go after, which accounts to go after, and all of that. So ultimately, I mean, as early on, obviously, as a founder, you are going to be associated with selling your first few deals, and several of those until $1 million in ARR. But as you start to have actual sales team, and then people who are coming in to support you in your growth journey, I think having the ops person as early as possible, and also not just a junior person, someone who can actually scale into multiple different areas, is something that I would suggest. Coming in from a very similar world prior to starting up.
Actually, that's an interesting point you're bringing up, Shiva, and I want to, in some ways, question back on that one. Is that as an early stage startup, your resources, cash are very limited. Now, at that stage, let's say 500K to $1 million ARR, I'm taking that bracket here, and quite a few founders here might be in that range on the call. You have an option of, for the lack of a better word, a junior jockey who can maintain CRM hygiene, can give you the data for forecasting every week, bring some basic sanity to the picture, but is a relatively lower cost resource versus actually, like you described, which is like a more senior resource. Would you rather do a step 1 and step 2 hiring in the sense that hire somebody early on at a relatively lower cost, when you get to 5 million, hire somebody more senior? Or would you recommend that for this kind of a function, you will actually hire for the future right in the beginning?
Yeah, I know, absolutely. Look, at the end of the day, as founders, you need to be completely resourceful, and you should go with probably a slightly lower cost resource that you could afford at that point in time from a budget standpoint. The only thing I would suggest is, and I'll talk about why I did what I did, but the only thing I'd suggest is, even though it could be a junior resource, do make sure that the person is able to actually scale up, right? It's not someone who might tap out fairly soon after you start to scale, but someone who can actually scale along, because a lot of decisions maybe initially might be very tactical. You have to set up the CRM, the process and all of that. But there's a lot of insights that come from those that you don't want it to, be lost out because the person is not able to scale up as the company quickly scales up in the relatively next few quarters from there on, right? Hopefully. In my case, the reason why I hired someone of that sort is just because I knew that person. I knew the person was available, and so I didn't want to miss out. And so it was obviously a investment slightly ahead of time, but obviously well worth it given the context of how I think about RevOps.
I think just building on that, Alok, I don't think it's specific to RevOps, right? The same question can be applied to marketing, to sales, or anything. I think I agree with what Shiva is saying. Anybody who's able to scale is what we should always look for. Yes, resource is a constraint in early stage, But I think in this space, anybody who's, analytical, who really wants to understand and grow is a perfect fit. Even what I've seen at LambdaTest, the team that we've had from the beginning, they're the ones who've really scaled to the current stage as well. And that's also important because they've been part of the early journey, right? They've been part of the experimentation of, okay, this market worked or this persona didn't work. And this is the data that we started put together. So they have a lot of history. And, I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I really consider RevOps to be the strategy function of the company because they're really defining what needs to be the next year plan, right? And there are a lot of things that go into this. How many people we need to hire, right? What numbers we need to set, what number for which market we need to set, what is the number for different product lines that you might be selling. So as this individual grows in the journey, they get a lot of understanding what has worked, what has not worked, and those inputs are very important. And data can only take you so much, but the inputs, oh, no. Customers in this region don't behave like that. What we've seen is it didn't work when you did that. Remember 2 years back? So tweak it this way. So my bias is to have somebody who grows in this journey. If you parachute somebody, they'll bring a lot of baggage in defining what the go-to-market structure or, this is how finance should do things in, let's say, incentive management, right? It's incentive management is a very emotional topic, very different for every company. So somebody who's been part of the journey is very important in putting this together.
I am actually going to come back to your strategy function comment a bit later, Maneesh. In fact, I'm a big fan of that too. And I'm going to come back. And for the record, since this was also part of my portfolio back in SAP days, it's a function very close to my heart. I want to take a question from the first one from the audience. This is from Jay Parikh. And I think this is, I guess, Maneesh, on your comment earlier, which is how close is RevOps with sales folks and finance? Is it 50-50 or tilted towards, in a way, would you skew it more towards, is it more a sales function or is it actually more a finance function, actually, in some sense?
I'd say it's more of a sales function. They are very tied to finance as well. Obviously, this function has to be very company focused, right? So they cannot lean towards finance and say, okay, no, we have to do it in a certain way. They have to be tuned towards what's the market reality and how sales people function. But I would say 70% leaning more towards sales because it's a revenue function, right? Whatever is required to drive revenue is what they should tilt towards. Again, I go back to that comment which I made, which is, this is subscription business. Finance is on a daily basis pinging, okay, deal signed, when is the subscription going live, or that customer wants to contract, or we've received a cancellation alert. So they need to be very hooked into both finance and sales because there is a nuance as well. The sales will tell you, no. There is something going on with that account. The payment is going to come in. It's not churning, right? So it's a bridge between both, but leaning more towards sales, whatever is required to drive revenue growth.
Got it.
Yeah, and I agree completely with what Maneesh has said, because ultimately what you want initially the RevOps team to really do is help improve anything on the funnel, right? Whether it's improving conversion rates, whether it's improving ACVs, like, figuring out the process, the data behind it, and how as a company you can optimize every part of the funnel to be able to accelerate growth. And at the end of the day, if you align it specific to finance, it could also mean that they may not have full context of all the things that are happening on the go-to-market side. And that's important, right? To, again, what Maneesh just mentioned before this, where it's not just about the data, it's also about the context associated with data that makes the ops person more powerful. In my view, as long as it's possible, you need to have the RevOps person potentially reporting into not the CRO, not the CFO, potentially to the CEO. What happens over time is, obviously it gets associated to the CRO, and in some public companies it gets associated with the finance org, the CFO. But ultimately, you want to have this team that's very closely associated with the sales org or the revenue org, but also has some independence to kind of go back and say, hey, you know what, this might be beneficial for the company, but has some risks associated. So, we have to structure it differently. For example, on the deals test side or anything else. So, but anyways, we can chat more about that.
Manish,
Yeah.
would you agree, disagree that the person should report to CEO?
Um,
Chiara, would you disagree?
again, this sort of goes by the stage of the company, Alok, I would say. Ideally, it should sit in a COO function. And I know you and I have spoken about it. The COO function has to sort of fine tune a lot of processes, etc. The risk of having it sit in the sales function is because sales is biased, right? They would want lower numbers as targets and overachieve. But as a company, you want to optimize for what you can really do. And what's the market that you're going to go after this year? So you would set higher numbers, right? So for RevOps, if you're sitting in pure sales, you will be constrained by what the sales team wants to achieve. Right? The CEO might not be clued into a lot of the operational stuff that is going on from a go-to-market perspective. Important for the CEO to know the flow between finance, marketing, and sales. But I think, as things evolve, and especially in SaaS companies, the CEO has to be fine-tuned towards more of product as well. I think the COO function is where it should be ideally sitting.
Got it. Got it. I'm going to pick a comment from Siva, and actually, with that, I'll pick up the question from Pallav. By the way, Pallav, you should be on the screen here giving all of us gyan. Pallav has built a very strong SaaS company in the past, building a second one now. Siva, you referred to the person knowing the sales context. And so Pallav's question is, what's the skills profile one should look at when it comes to hiring a RevOps person, right? Given that this role cuts across planning, process, tools, etc. And also in his question, what would be the top KRAs, KPIs to measure success of the function of the person, whatever. So actually, it's a great question, Pallav. Would love to get an answer from either or both, actually.
Yeah, maybe I'll start off. I think what I feel is, I mean, as far as the skill sets itself, if it's just one person that you're hiring, and that's going to be the case, at least for some time, where the next 12, 18 months, only this person is going to kind of manage everything related to RevOps, given, the company's at that stage or is growing at that stage. I would heavily index more on someone who is very comfortable with data, right? Because again, you can't find somebody who can do a lot of different things early on. So if you were to index on one side, that I would be someone who's more played like a business analyst role, in potentially, any industry company or for that matter, in one of these data analytics companies, right? But more, I would still evaluate, I mean, while the primary skill set would be analytics, I would still evaluate them also on their business understanding and context, their ability to understand, how businesses work, how does companies make money, what is the flow of the entire go to market from marketing to sales to even customer success for that matter. So someone who is very comfortable talking about business and how business functions work, but has a core skill set of analytics would be probably the first person that I'd hire if there's only one person that I could hire at that point in time. Because then that person can obviously, like typically data analysts are very comfortable in getting their hands dirty, are comfortable working with tools, can write, some kind of SQL queries if need be, and ultimately, be able to understand, at least think very systems first, to know, okay, what, if we have to get all of this together, then we need to, either invest in this particular tool, or for that matter, this is the gap that's, kind of constraining us from going further on the process side. So that's what I would say from a skill set standpoint. I don't know if Maneesh wants to add anything from his context.
No, I totally agree. I don't think a sales background is important. The data analytical part is super important. I think I will just supplement one soft skill is having good interpersonal / communication skill, because this role has to work with different functions. And I can tell you many times I use my RevOps team to send out the nasty stuff to different team members, tell them this is what is going on. So they have to be talking to the frontline sales team or the finance team in a diplomatic way to handle stuff. So I think communication is also a very important part of this role.
If I may, actually, and sorry, I know my job was more to ask questions, but I might slightly disagree with both of you on this. I've actually felt in the past that as you scale, in addition to analytical skills, if you can find someone with sales background also, that actually does lend a lot of credibility. And Maneesh, you argued earlier that this function can actually be the go-to-market strategy function of the organization, which actually I strongly believe in fact, that. And I find that it has, one is just the contextual understanding and not just a spreadsheet view of the world. And number two is the ability to get credibility with the different sales leaders as your organization begins to grow. Sometimes it's very hard to create when you do not come from that background. And that's why I do think that the analytical skills is a non-negotiable, because that's indeed the science that you're bringing to the table here. If in addition you can find someone with some sales background, I think that just adds a lot of credibility and context to this function. But it's a very hard skill to find as well then.
Absolutely.
It is, I think, Alok, the only... Go ahead.
Sorry, go for it, Maneesh. Yeah. No, so I was just going to say, at the end of the day, I was presuming that you just have one person to hire. And generally what I've seen is analytics and sales as personas don't overlap as much.
I'm with you.
So which is why I would index more on if there's just one person to hire. Sorry.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I think it's also scale, Alok. I think, if you take context of large companies like an SAP or a GitHub, right? The context is different, the scale is different.
Yeah.
There you would have the liberty of bringing somebody with that experience. But I think us in this ecosystem and a lot of people on the call, getting somebody with a sales background and doing it is a little tricky. I think Siva is lucky because he was part of the Freshworks journey. He saw that whole scale, so he could replicate it. But for a lot of us, getting somebody from a sales ops background from a bigger company into what we all do, I don't think it'll work. Once you get to, let's say, a 50 million, 75 million, maybe things would change. But at this point in time, I would lean towards scaling the existing team. All of the strategy pieces, so going back to that point, right? The sales context, the strategy context, that comes from the founding team, right? Either the founders or the CRO or the CEO. They're sort of sprinkling that exact thing that you talked about, bringing that sales flavor, that this is the segmentation. No, this is not how this will work. You have to structure the team in this way because, this behavior is different for this kind of a team. So I think that comes from the leadership team.
Fair point. Second part of his question, what are the top KRAs or KPIs for this function and the individual?
I think early on, so I'm presuming again, this is your first RevOps person that you've hired. So immediate thing that I would think of is really getting, capturing all of the data as much as possible across the funnel and being able to, very confidently go out and say, hey, this is the source of truth. That's the first problem in early stage companies, right? Like when you have a lot of these systems, but ultimately it's like you can't go back and see where all your pipeline is coming from, or for that matter, there's issues associated with the cleanliness of the data, or it's also not just captured in the first place, right? So, for the first thing would really be getting capturing all of the data in the first place and being able to actually even report and get clean data that you can trust is right. And so there's no confusion around, okay, whether marketing is bringing the right data or sales is bringing the right data, for example. So that's the first piece, early on. Then obviously over time, I mean, as companies evolve, I think of the RevOps function in a few different ways that I earlier mentioned, right? Which is planning, process, and ultimately tools. But it really comes down to, is the operations team helping optimize some portion of the funnel, right? Whether it's in terms of pipe generation, in terms of sales conversion rates, in terms of say ACV improvement. So any of the key metrics that ultimately impact your revenue goals, what's been the revenue operations team's contribution towards it? Whether it's in process improvement, whether it's putting a sales process together, or whether it's thinking about from an ACV standpoint, deals test as a process, or from a pipeline generation standpoint, are we looking at, if it's inbound, are we talking about conversion rates? If it's more the BDR function, then are we talking about what are the different sources of BDR output? How are we effectively using intent data, and what's the intent data conversion rate? So any part of the funnel, how is the RevOps being able to influence improvement, whether it's conversion rates, whether it's movement of the metric? Ultimately, it has to be some quantitative metric that they're able to influence on, because that's really why the function is in there in the first place. Of course, there's the other things, which is it starts off, before you start the new year, by Q3, Q4, you want to start to have the RevOps team clearly plan out the year revenue goals. How sure are we in terms of going after these goals? Is it just on the spreadsheet, or is it realistic? What's really the risks associated with it? What's the capacity that we need to build to be able to support our aspirations? And ensuring that we are able to actively track whether it's ramped capacity or anything else that will support us on the goals would be the other thing that I would think of.
Got it.
I mean, just to add, Alok, I think all the reporting and metrics definitely needs to be tracked, right? So that's part of the deliverable. I think what KRAs I have for the team in RevOps is how efficiently are they doing it? So how are they looking at forecasting accuracy, for example? Are they building heuristics for forecasting? Are they sending out, for example, the incentive? Are they doing it bang on time?
Yeah.
Because it has to be done bang on time. It cannot be delayed. Doing the planning for the next quarter right now. So I give timelines. It should be done by this time. That's how it should be delivered. Obviously, it changes once you're putting in tools. So there's a KRA. Okay, you need to implement, the ARR measurement tool, the subscription management tool, or you need to implement the CRM tool or the incentive management tool like Everstage. So those KRAs keep coming. But I think what I hinge on is, the speed of them picking up stuff and reporting them back to the team, like dashboards, right? How quickly are you updating the dashboards? How quickly are you communicating? As soon as the quarter ends, first day of the quarter, have you sent out, detailed analysis of, okay, what worked, what didn't work? Because it doesn't make sense if you send it 2 weeks later. You have to send it on the first. So these softer KRAs defining, because this is the operational rigor and efficiency that RevOps has to do. Because in the end, it has to be that oil in that whole SaaS machinery. They're the ones who are oiling this whole machinery, giving reports, giving nudges. Okay, you missed on this number or this target because you didn't look at it this way. Or, there are, let's say, 50 enterprise customers who came through the self-serve motion. They're sitting in the self-serve, but I think this sales team can pick it up and go and upsell it. So they are the ones who are picking this up and giving these signals, as Siva was saying, to the different functions. So I measure it in the speed and accuracy of how they're doing this.
Got it. I want to pick up the question from Gautam Pai. It's a very interesting question, and I will rephrase this a little bit. It's an aspect we have not explored so far. So this is sales, right? Now, what feeds into sales is marketing, usually. And therefore, if you begin to look at the funnel, there is a lot of marketing ops to be done as well. On the other side of that equation lies customer success. And because there is a lot of renewal revenue, expansion revenue in many cases, etc., is being driven from that side as well. They're actually also contributing into. Now, how do you think about structuring these sales ops, CS ops, marketing ops differently together? Do you put them all into a same box? Not. Would love to get your commentary on just the structuring of these functions. What do you combine and what do you not combine?
I mean, my view would be to combine it. Obviously, it's I mean, if you have to have different resources because there's a skill issue, then that's completely different. But I still would argue, especially with sales ops and CS ops, it's probably very complementary in terms of skill sets. I would say marketing ops is the one that's slightly different in terms of how you deal with in terms of marketing tech stack
Yeah.
and the entire portion. As far as sales ops and CS ops go, I think they should be combined right from day one. Even if you were to have a different marketing ops, but ultimately the view is, if you could get a unified RevOps, then obviously, as the team grows, you might have people specializing in each of these. But the earlier that you can get into a unified RevOps, the better for the company.
Yeah, I see it as a mix. Obviously, the CRM is a single source of truth. That's where everybody is sort of referring to. Yes, I've seen marketing have data teams. It's not really ops team data because they have to create cohorts, right? I want to do this marketing for FSI. I want to do this for something else. So they have data teams that work on cohorts. But as Shiva was saying, I think from an ops perspective, it's all one. As the team grows in the RevOps function, you might have one team, or one individual working for marketing, one for customer success, because then they become Spocks also, right? The different team members in the RevOps function also become trusted advisor of the different leaders. The CSM leader should be talking to the CS ops folks. Even from a sales perspective, as you can imagine, APAC, EMEA, Americas, there are 3 geographies. So you might have one, RevOps for each of the geographies because they're then dedicated as you scale. Right? Earlier, you will have 1 or 2 people, but as you scale, it sort of becomes segmented, but it's part of the RevOps team or RevOps function.
Got it. One other question, which I have seen slightly different views depending on who you talk to, is that, see, both of you talked about planning, process, data, all those things, collections, etc., all being part of this bucket. As a sales team begins to grow, one of the things one is looking at is just the pipeline for new hires. Once they're on board, making sure that they are being ramped up and what we would classically call the sales readiness function. Once they are there and they're into sales cycles, then you have the sales enablement function, because inside of sales cycle, somebody needs to be helping them with the references, customer pushbacks, etc., all that. As you have organized your RevOps functions, do you club some of these functions also as part of the RevOps leader responsibility, or these you think as completely different and actually might put that, let's say, within product marketing?
I think in my view, and also, because we work with a lot of companies and their RevOps functions,
Yeah.
I think what I've seen is it's just a function of how capable the RevOps function and the leader is in order to subsume some of these, skill sets, right? Like, because, for example, sales enablement is something that's, slightly different from, the core skill sets of what an ops team would do. And so if you don't have, say, for example, somebody who's either from a product marketing or sales background who understands how to, best enable the sales function, maybe, having it separate is better option. But ultimately, I think it really comes down to, what the kind of team you have and what can they, do effectively. I think that's how I would think about it and not have a hard and fast rule.
I lean towards consolidating under a CEO function, Alok, because these are all operations, right? RevOps is operations, deal desk is operations, sales enablement is operations. All of this comes together because sales enablement is not only for sales, it's also for your BDR and SDR functions, right? They also need to be enabled on, what's the pitch, how do you counter everything? Case studies, for example, as you scale, you need more and more case studies to be shared with customers. So all of this sort of sits under the operations bucket. And even at this point in time for us, for example, not everything is consolidated because we haven't reached that scale where everything needs to come together. They're sitting with different owners because it's also a function of who's the most capable at this point in time to be able to help us get that done. So, okay, you own this piece. As we scale, probably it'll come together.
Got it. One other question, which is that, in the last 5 to 10 years, as we have all witnessed, just the tooling inside the marketing, sales, and CS, actually all 3, has just grown. I mean, all of us who look at these landscapes, just first of all, the number of partitions in sales tech, the boxes are hard to count. Forget the number of companies in each of those boxes, but the boxes themselves are very hard to count today, right? You are being bombarded left and right with so many different tools that every salesperson has. But with that is also the growth in just a massive amount of data. Just imagine how much data today a gong may generate, or a seismic may generate, or something else, right? I mean, there are so many things. So have you seen sort of in some sense in the redefinition of what a sales ops or a RevOps function itself is, just because of the growth in the amount of data? I mean, even in the companies that you have been part of, do you see a massive change in the definition of the role itself because of the evolution of so much data today?
I think understanding of different kind of tooling is the important part. I think incentive management itself is important, because if you think back 10, 15 years, all of the incentive management used to sit purely in finance, right? Now it has sort of moved over here more in RevOps and sales ops, because a lot of things are being tied together. That's a huge change. And as you said, so many tools. And to get answers to questions, the RevOps individual or the team needs to know every tool. They can't say, oh, okay, I need to figure out from finance because that data sits in Stripe. It doesn't work. And I can tell you it is really getting complicated. There's just too many tools. And this is the promise of SaaS, right? Everybody wants to use their own tool, right? There is somebody in marketing who wants to do ABM specifically in a different tool. Somebody wants to do, email nurturing in a different tool. Somebody wants to use a different tool for outbound. It's not easy.
Yeah, and I think absolutely. I think the way I think about tools, and I think this is a very important role of the ops person to actually be constantly evaluating and seeing, what's the best out there. Especially if you think about, for example, on the marketing side, right? I'm sure the marketing team is looking at it, but ultimately the RevOps person has context of what is actually feasible within the construct of your GTM funnel. And not just go out and randomly, buy one tool and then not use it, right? So, and if you're not constantly looking at what's out there, then you might be left behind. Especially, I would say more around marketing tech, more than even sales tech and customer success tech, because there's just so much of evolution and what potentially AI could enable you and get either efficiencies or even potential incremental pipe. So somebody who's obviously very comfortable and very eager to evaluate new tools is actually going to be an important skill set as well from a RevOps persona standpoint.
One of the questions that sort of came on the side here on the Q&A panel, this is from Ritvij Pathak, saying that based on Maneesh's response, if RevOps reports fall under operations, does the cost of RevOps fall under service cost? Will you count it as part of your CAC, or will you not count it as part of your CAC? I know it's a very micro question, but if either of you have a point of view, would love to know.
I mean, in my mind, so I think a lot of publicly listed companies, if you look at their SaaS companies, most of them club RevOps under G&A because they have them reporting into finance org. I don't know if they're solving for better CAC metrics by doing that, but ultimately that's the common theme in more mature large companies. Early on, I don't know how much of the cost accounting also really matters, but it's really up to the org and what kind of functions that they cover as part of RevOps. But I know, Maneesh, if you had a different way to think.
Yeah, I would also put it in G&A, and I think the way I look at it is more than CAC, because in this right now, we look at revenue per FTE also as an important thing. That's a broader metric at this point in time.
Understand. I do want to come back to the tooling question, actually, which is that there is a tooling overall for sales, marketing, etc. What is the tooling for RevOps? And I know, Siva, you sit very close to this, but would love to get your view as a provider as well. And Manish, then your view as a practitioner as well. And at what stage should one begin to think about this tooling? Sort of what is too soon versus what is too late?
I think I don't specifically suggest or recommend any tools from a RevOps only focused standpoint, because they are ultimately still power users or administrators in several of these tools. For themselves, it's primarily around some form of to-do list management, or for that matter, managing a lot of the tasks. Because what ends up happening in ops, Alok, is you never get into the limelight when things are going well. But when something fails, that's the first time the ops person is called out, right? So you want to make sure, and so what ends up happening every day is you prioritize the ones that are urgent, not the important ones that are going to be impactful for the company, right? And eventually, even the important ones become urgent. So just a way for you to manage all your tasks and to-dos, I think is probably the only thing that I would think of for RevOps itself from a tooling standpoint, because otherwise they are anyways power users across most of the other tools that are important for the company.
Yeah, I think my cheeky answer would be Google Sheets. That's the power tool for the RevOps team. But I think, as Shiva was saying, power user of every tool. If I think of my team, for them, CRM, the Salesforce is the power platform. Everstage is also their platform. Nobody else accesses it or uses it apart from the RevOps team. Drivetrain is the other platform where they would look at, what's the ARR movement, what's the MRR, slice and dice of ARR and MRR. The other teams don't have access to it, only the product management team and the RevOps team. So I think these three core platforms are the important ones that they manage. But they're always, since they're the analytical team, right, they're always culling out data from different platforms, taking it into a Google Sheet and doing a lot of the analysis on top of it.
Manish, because you touched upon that, in fact, I was going to also talk about the planning tools like a drivetrain, etc. And of course, incentive compensation management, which is core to whatever stage does it well. At what stage do you feel that, look, it becomes important to have these? Would you do that at 1 million ARR again? Would you do that at 5 million? Would you do it at 10 million? At what stage would you say that, look, it's an overkill or an underkill, if that's such a word exists?
I
Go
think,
ahead, Siva. Okay, sorry.
We started doing it when we hit 10.
Achha.
I think 10 sort of feels like a magic number where it becomes important because all the PMF is done. You have validated market segments. You know what is working. Now it's about scale, and scale means adding more people also, right? So if you're going to add a lot more salespeople, then they need consistent view of their incentive, right? Because then it's all about motivation, retaining the team, etc. So having that in place is super important. I think before that we were predominantly doing Google Sheets. We were, doing Everstage as well, but things were moving around so much we didn't standardize the compensation management itself, right? We were doing different things for different team members in different markets, different segments. But then at 10, we sort of brought everything together. Even before 10, we were doing a lot of planning in Sheets. We still do a lot of planning in Google Sheets. But I think the drivetrain piece sort of gave us a lot of analytical inputs on, what are the trends, right? Where is the churn coming from? Where is contraction coming from? How do we plan around it? That's when we started doing a lot more. So before 10, we already had drivetrain in place. That's what I meant. But I think going deeper on the Everstage part, Shiva, we started really doing it post 10. I don't know if I answered your question accurately, Alok.
No, you did. You did. I mean, Shiva, any difference in opinion on when to start the journey on this tooling?
No, I think specifically, at least with respect to commissions, I would say, until about 20 commissionable, employees, whether it's sales or BDR or all of them put together, I think you should be good with spreadsheets, because you've still not, figured out on a standardized commission plan, or you're still figuring that out. The processes may not be set. So I think before 20 commissionable employees, it might be fairly early. Post that, you could start to think of the tool depending on the kind of pain that you're seeing in the org with respect to planning and administration of commissions. as far as overall, revenue planning goes, again, that comes back from the kind of analytics that you have in data, right? Like, so again, I would differentiate this slightly from a company that's more focused on, say, the SMB segment.
Yeah.
You would generate more data, which means that there is an opportunity for you to, potentially look at a more analytical way of planning much ahead than a more enterprise-focused company, for example.
Yeah. Actually, you hit upon, I think, at least a very important point, Siva. I find that in many of these toolings, volume of deals, not just revenue, your ARR is not the only metric. The volume sometimes drives the complexity. It also drives the amount of data that you have to analyze. If you are in the business of doing $1 million deals and you close 2 of them in a quarter, many of that tool sets actually are not as important to you, right? On the other hand, if you're doing $3,000 deals and you have, I don't know, 50 of them in a quarter, and therefore you're processing 250 deals, even in your SQL to sort of close deals, it's a very different complexity that you are dealing with. And I think that drives a lot of the need for thinking about the role itself and the tooling around it. I think it's a very critical distinction. I want to pick up one question which I could not understand, but I wanted to see if either of you understand the question. And this is a question from Shri. And Shri, if neither of them understand the question, I would request you to either come online here or re-articulate your question, which is how can the RevOps team support MRE teams as they fulfill a critical role? I don't know what MRE is, so I will take an excuse card on that one. But if either of you understand, please feel free to answer.
I think MRE is the market research team that supports BDR and marketing functions.
Okay.
It's called MRE, MRA in some cases, but ultimately, my view is the MRE team and the lead of the MRE team ultimately should report into the RevOps, because a lot of things, like for example, what Maneesh was also saying in marketing ops, there's a bunch of different things that you have to do, which is related to data and enrichment of accounts to then segment and then go after, or for that matter, contact enrichment, etc. So ultimately, the MRE team will have to be very closely working with RevOps because RevOps can't execute on some of the goals without having the MRE in place. And in terms of support, ultimately, it's really about trying to see how you can get them more, faster in terms of their work output, right? Because in a lot of cases, MRE work is a lot of grunt work. It's enrichment of contacts, accounts, anything to do with data associated with the GTM funnel. And so there are obviously a lot of things that you can do with the latest available tool sets that are there. So RevOps is really thinking through on how can you have a really, really small but efficient MRE team to be able to get to what you need as a company.
Got it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, I go back to that statement, which I went out on a limb and said, the RevOps team is driving the strategy of the company, right? So you want them to feed into the MREs or, quote unquote, the data teams to say, okay, these are the industries and these are the segments that we will sell to, right? Go and find me more companies or enrich data around this. And you don't want it to be the other way around. So I think it's exactly what Shiva was saying. They're feeding into the MRE teams.
I understand. I'm going to go into 2 micro topics. One is, and by the way, you did answer the right question because Shri did put that comment. Thank you, Shri, for the question as well. 2 micro topics. One is that most founders on this call, and I'm assuming the 2 of you included, are probably bothered by what number you are forecasting to your board as well. As entrepreneurs, most of you are very optimistic. We tend to sort of sometimes jump ahead of ourselves. What discipline or science have you seen in the forecasting process, and therefore what value has the RevOps person been able to add to be able to actually drive some level of forecasting accuracy? And also, at what stage do you think it even becomes feasible and meaningful?
So when you say forecasting, are you talking about the planning forecasting or the quarterly forecasting?
Quarterly forecasting, yeah. Quarterly forecasting, yeah.
Okay. So I think the way I think about this is actually, let me actually start with planning itself, right? And then come into the quarterly forecasting. So at the end of the day, most companies, most board commits are top down, right? That's how it starts off. Like there's an aspiration that you want to get to, but ultimately, you try and make data, come to what you want to get to as from an aspiration standpoint. So that's where it starts. So as part of the planning, you've done a lot of different things that needs to work to be able to get to your number, right? And and the classic things of how much of pipe you need to generate, how much of conversion rates from that pipe, ACVs associated, all of that, right?
Right.
Now, obviously, as you get to the year, things change. The pipe may not have happened. The sales cycle might have elongated. The ACVs might be lesser. The conversion rates might be poor in particular segments. And ultimately, as you think about forecasting for the quarter, all of this is really where it comes back to, because again, you have to differentiate between SMB forecasting and enterprise forecasting. In enterprise forecasting, obviously, it's really now going into the sales process itself and seeing, okay, where are we in the deal? The salesperson could say, we're almost at the end of it, but it may not be any time there, and get pushed to the next quarter, right? But in SMB, it's really data. Like if 30 days sales cycle is at the start of the month, I would know at the end of the month where I should be based on my historical data. And so that's really where I feel RevOps can help. So if it's SMB, it's more data related. If it's enterprise, then it's more sales process related, whether it's MEDPIC or whatever that you first set up, and then ultimately through the sales process, which stage it is in and what's the probability of conversion from that stage based on historical data.
You've touched a topic which is so hard, man. It's tough. No matter how many systems you put in place, people forecast wrong all the time. I agree with what Siva was saying, the SMB and the enterprise part, but I think there are some real world challenges in forecasting, which is we have a lot of young folks, many of them who are doing sales for the first time. So explaining to them what a commit really means, what a forecast really means, right? They might be committing a deal, they might be putting everything in the CRM because they believe it's there, right? But it doesn't happen, right? So I think that coaching goes on. What the RevOps team and I've sort of coached them over the years is to build heuristics, right? Because this is also based on individuals and leaders. That leader is always overcommitting, right? That person will sandbag. So they've now understood behavior of different teams and people as well. So this goes back to the KRA question, Alok, right? Being able to understand forecasts. Yeah, the system forecast might say that we'll do, let's say, 5 million this quarter. What are you seeing in the system? What have you seen based on past performance? You can tell me that, okay, this won't work, Maneesh, but this deal, they just added it yesterday. I don't know if it's really going to close this quarter. So those are the kind of heuristics that they sort of build and bring onto the table. But forecasting is hard. Very hard. And as Siva was saying, it's a top down from a board perspective. But I think once you get into planning, many of you will start to do that is the uplift. The board might tell you to do $100. Do you do an uplift of 5%, 10%, 20%, 30% to distribute that to your sales team? So if you distribute 130, you're at least building on past data and heuristic that you will at least get to 99 or 101. So those are the things that the RevOps team will have to sort of churn through. It's not on day one. It's not on day 365 either. It's actually, 1-2 years down the line that this heuristics gets built into the culture of the company. Very hard. I keep doing sessions, man. Oh, this hurts. I'm telling you, this hurts.
Guys, we always promise that we will end sharply at the hour. We are at 6:30. So while there are still quite a few questions on the board, but we will have to take a break at this point in time. So again, want to thank everybody who attended the SaaS Talks today. And a special thank you to both Siva and Maneesh. And Maneesh, I know you are traveling on the East Coast. Again, appreciate your being on the call today. And thank you for a wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alok. Thank you, everybody. Do feel free to reach out for any questions unanswered. Happy to help.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. Thank you, Alok. Thanks, Maneesh. And, happy to help if there's any further questions. So feel free to reach out. Thanks.